I wanted to share a couple visions first of all. And I felt something yesterday that came across so strong that it put me in tears. And it was just based off of the revelation of where we are in time right now, and it just comes across so gentle, but yet it speaks so firmly. And I just wanted to do my best to release a picture of how it spoke, because it was really talking about the mastery of small, and it was really comprehending beginning's end and end's beginning, and the revelation of the circle. And it's really our flight and our journey, and it's how we process and how we have a perspective, and it goes back to so many things. It's so steeped in the beginning of our journey, because it's based on really the innocence of first steps and how powerful they are. So I'm really speaking this to encourage that we think of our first beginning steps and where we are is to be so insignificant that we really amount to nothing, and how could we possibly get anywhere in that level of not knowing. But there's so much power in the insignificant. We don't realize truly the value that is in the innocence, because what it is, it's a measure of humility when we have the realization of how far and how vast the Father is, and the depth of his state of being. And that's the undoing that produces really intention that directs us into a path. And I want to get to this a little further on, but it just really spoke to me yesterday about, it just undid me about how we meet beginning's end at end's beginning, because it's the innocence of the first step that is met with the completion of the last step. They meet face to face. And in that revelation, we realize that it's not really the lofty of knowledge that produces the measure of intention. It's the letting go of it, realizing that it's humility that established the first step. And it spoke to me in such a way yesterday that I just started just weeping about, oh my goodness, it's letting go. And if we only knew that in the beginning, we wouldn't hold so tightly to the information. Yet there is a process and a reason to the frequency, but yet it's in the gentleness of becoming. I just want to encourage us all, including myself, not to lose sight of humility, because that's what it takes to initiate the first steps. It's just the complete abandonment of the nothing. Yet then we go in our circle, and then we complete it, because this is all about the closing of the circle. The sealing of the circle is based on the ability to be completed in the nothingness of the beginning. And I know that's a little tangled, and it's a little sounds like it's an oxymoron, but yet is exactly what this picture is up that you picked, and go like, wow, that's exactly what I wanted to talk about, is what is really transacting in this, because this speaks through time. It is everything as a summational total, as it is really nothing in its own breath. It's just a way of it. It's just an expression. That's all it is. And so it doesn't need to be, because it has a dragon's head, doesn't mean to be a spooky. It just means something needs to arise as something needs to be laid down, and it's done in the same breath of a moment, in the process of a thought. So I wanted to start with perspective on how we what the Spirit shows me that was so undoing to me in my dream, and a dream vision that I had, and I shared it with you about being in the room with a couple of master mathematicians, and we were told to get up and write the equation that was thus far our summational total of us being master mathematicians. And I was sitting there, and I felt, as I do now, going like, I'm not a mathematician. I felt very intimidated. And these gentlemen get up, and there's three of us, and the first guy gets up, and there's a whiteboard that's about 6 by 8, and the equation is incredibly detailed and long. I was kind of joking with you about it, how it was just like, it's just squiggly upon squiggly, but yet it made complete sense to this individual, and the squiggles equated as a summational measure, and thus and thus and thus and thus, and then he came to his conclusion at the bottom of the board, and he walked away completing it. And I was dumbfounded by the level of revelation and insight to his mathematical equation. And then the next guy came up, and he did the same thing, and I felt really inadequate, and I'm sitting there, and I'm walking towards the board as it's my turn, and I'm almost going like, oh, Spirit, like, I don't even have the ability to write a squiggle correctly to really give a definition of what that squiggle would be. It's going to be this is going to be extremely revealing. And the Spirit was like speaking to me, saying, that's okay, I'll take you through step by step. Now, I was expecting expression of squiggles and lines and dots and dashes and equational measures that equate to, right, a universal law of extraction and expansion, right, by definition of formula.
And which had been by itself would have been really cool.
Which would have been really cool. But so I get up there, and I'm kind of waiting, and as I'm going, each step is presenting itself, and this is exactly what it speaks to me every day about presenting myself in the position of rightful anticipation. To me, that's the language that defines reverence, of really comprehending anticipation, because I have value associated to who and what the Ruach is in my life, and so I have anticipation. And so I get up there, and the Spirit just says, now erase it, clear the board to start your equation. So I'm erasing everything, and the Spirit just says, now turn around, and I turn around, and then the Spirit says, now say you're done. And I said, I'm done.
I love it.
And now I kind of woke up with the feeling that then I'm going, oh my goodness, and it really spoke. I mean, it sunk into me deep that, and I'm saying this to really shed light on the value of perspective and the uniqueness of individuality, that we are not to have another man's equation dictate an outcome for us or a conclusion. Because there is not a greater expression than the empty board, because it sets itself up for full potentiality.
Yeah.
The minimalist mark on the board, if I felt necessary to really allow myself to be seen in a moment by justification of a mark, would have been just a dot. Because the dot itself would have been a completed circle.
In its smallest form.
In its smallest form on the expanse of the white board.
Right.
Because in its expression, the white board was really universal concept in a micro cosm of reality, for the purpose of explaining that which we do not know. Yet in our ego, we have this need and desire to really express ourselves as summational or equations that justify our existence.
Right, and in actuality, that little dot would have just been saying, I am here.
Here I am in the summational
right.
Total, regardless of what it is. It is simply this, but the greater expression is the empty board, because it really is unlimited. It's unlimited potential in its expression, and it allows for such vastness and uniqueness of expression of individuality.
Well, and it's that place, that the nothingness where everything is at.
Exactly. And I was just, when I woke up or came out of that vision, I was like, wow, that was really powerful, and it stuck with me on just how we seek equations. And I say that we're to vet, and I'm saying this to us too, I expect that we are vetted and don't allow for our limited expression to become a final expression of how another individual should be. What we've always said is that our expectation is that another would stand upon our shoulders.
Exactly.
And so I say that to say exactly why I shared that is like if there's an opportunity for someone to be catapulted in to the depth of expanse's reward, then so be it. If we are simply
A step.
a marker or a
Yeah.
step or a
Yeah.
potential, then that is exactly what we are supposed to be doing in this time. And I know that there's people out there that fulfill that role alongside of us and say, absolutely. And by no means do we say that we know it all, because we do not. I do not. It is simply the position. My heart is to complete my circle. And that's what touched me so much yesterday, that that the greatest circle ends at start's smallest beginning.
Right.
And it just, I had to stare at that sentence that the Spirit just said, write this. And our greatest accomplishment is when we can clearly see and become one with our humble beginnings.
Right.
And that is the mastery of large that meets the mastery of small. Because it's not about the expanse of intellect that really extends us. It's really, yes, it's so simplistic in its nature, as you know this, that really the level of redundancies of inculcation in this language is really simplistic by nature, is it not?
Oh, it totally is.
It's
like once you see it, you can't unsee it, and once you see it, you can become it. I mean, and it's then you really do, like you said, you render it to being, oh my gosh, it's really a simple equation.
So really, if I could equate it, if I did dare, even though the Spirit showed me my whiteboard, but if I could write and say it in a sentence, I would say that it's simply the wrestle of ourselves that equate to a measure of intention. There is an intention for us to become, and it's directly tethered to humility. It's a measure of humility that we have to wrestle through, and this is part of this the mastery of small is this revelation. I wanted to share a vision I had, and you know this vision because it was almost
Jeez Louise, that was a long time
a long
ago.
time ago. But it started the
It
journey
was
of,
like back in 2010, like the end of 2010 or somewhere in there.
yeah. And I didn't really have the full expression of it until, no, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago or so. It came to me in just a deeper way, and I was like, oh my goodness, I had no idea that's what it was saying. And the vision was this. I was standing in a dry dock where boats are pulled up on the ways, and the language spoke very prophetically about, because even ways are what carry the vessel, and this would be because ways are two tracks that would pull out for the purpose of restoration or refitting, and allows it to be removed from the water, just so if people don't know what ways are. And now this is the language of mother and father, right? It's what cradles
The two tracks, yeah.
the ribbing of a vessel, that nurtures it so it doesn't implode upon itself for the purpose of a retrofit.
Right.
And it was a very joyous time, and I was standing looking at it pretty much head on, maybe a little off to one side, and there was an individual behind me telling me the procedures that we're about to transact. And it was broad daylight, and I saw this group of individuals, probably 3 or 4, coming up alongside. They were on, if I was looking at it, they were on the left-hand side, and they walked up to it, and they started working on the lower planks below the water line of the boat.
So in other words, it was in the process of being built.
It was in the process of being constructed, and it was like plank upon plank, right? It was that same line upon line, precept upon precept,
a
right?
little here, a little there.
And if you look at that verse, actually, I have that verse. It's actually quite amazing, because it's precept, and then the next word for precept has a lamed on the prefix, and then line, and then the next word for line is a lamed to line, and
Right.
they build upon themselves. So the teachings build upon themselves
Yep.
is really what it's saying. But I didn't know that at that time. What I did see was like, oh, it's a boat being built, and at that time I was still in the Christian circle, so I just took it as the Ark representation, very limited. But I'm watching this team build, and they were doing what they were doing, plank upon plank, and then they left for the day. The sun went down, and then it's like a hand came up over my face and split my nose between eye and eye. So I mean, it didn't cut me, split me. It just lifted itself up and separated my vantage and perspective to see the night and the day in one scene. So it was
right.
like
So one side was night and one side was day.
Right.
And you were seeing it simultaneously.
And I was seeing it simultaneously.
Right.
And on the nighttime side, I saw a hooded character come up, and he was in the shades and the shadows, and he came up and he was yanking the planks off the right-hand side. And I had this unction to yell, like, hey, like, like, don't be tearing at what someone just accomplished. And it just felt like he had reasons for what he was doing, but it didn't seem good, it didn't seem bad. I just was watching it. Now, I prejudged it then based on what I thought it was, based on my limited perspective. But
because you were basically saying that it was an enemy that was coming in to tearing off the work.
Well, yes, because the perspective of that time of the Christian church had built a paradigm or a narrative within me to say dark is bad, shade is bad. Anything done in the nighttime hours is not befitting of any
evil,
right,
evil and wicked.
Evil and wicked. So
yeah.
So my perception, and I wouldn't even spend that long in the Christian church to realize that. That's just how long. But then I saw he left, and then the crew in the morning came again. The hand was still up dividing the light and the dark, and the crew came in the morning. They circumnavigated the vessel. They saw the disruption or whatever transpired in the night, and they never lost. They had this amazing joyous expression on their face, and they just fixed it. They just do. They already kind of knew that that's what was needed, and they just fixed it, and they went about the business that they were normally doing on their normal program. But they just kind of took a peruse of what needed to be done, and they said, oh, this has come loose, and they fixed it. I was told, whispered in my ear as the dream was coming to an end, or that vision came to an end, was that this is the painstaking process of building the ark, for that which is to contain and hold the water is tedious. It's the laborious work of the painstaking work of shoulder upon shoulder. And it was almost told that you will meet people in the days that are coming that will be in the representation of plank upon plank, and they will be so form-fitted that there won't be any room, that the water will actually be a catalyst for expansion to seal up any potential of leakage. And then it said above the water line will be in the season of a quick works, that it's not going to be really that important, because it's not going to have to really hold back the pressure of being under the water. This will simply be those, it'll be like a boom, 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 and then it's going to be done, kind of thing.
The ones that are above the water
line. The ones
line.
that are above the water line, because it doesn't need the same level of integrity, yet it still needs to have integral qualities about it. So anyways, I was asked to release that dream to the body at the time. And now, years later, as digging out through the forensic work of excavation that we do, I was revealed the greater works of really what that dream was saying. It's saying the same thing, is both night and day is the wrestle. It is saying that you are an adversarial component as well as a friend. That in your daytime work, the nighttime still reveals and pulls back what needs to be pulled back, so there can be amending in the day. And it sets up us to succeed based on the ability to see correctly, realizing that the hooded character was me.
Right.
And that undid me when I had that revelation, went, oh my goodness, I am an adversarial foe to myself. Now, by right perspective, that is truly a blessing. If I can see that for the value and the frequency of truly what it's admitting, it is saying that where you are weak, I am strong. What you don't see, I see, and I will, what looks like sabotage to you is actually a condition of love to me.
So in other words, that was your higher self assisting you.
Right.
Without you knowing it. It was you.
It was me.
Trying to assist you.
Right.
But at the time you couldn't see that it was you.
I couldn't see. Again, right. I was limited in my...
So then the lesser narrative would be the adversarial component, somebody else or something else externally coming to sabotage. The higher narrative is like, no, I am an adversary, but yet this is going to produce what is necessary to make the vessel watertight.
Right. Until we realize that it's ourselves that are in this wrestle, then we're always going to point the finger in an opposite direction.
Externally.
And we're never going to see the full potential of who we are, because we're going to put it on someone else's shoulders. It's their responsibility. versus it's our job to go inwardly to really wrestle the wrestle. And this is part of what the Spirit showed me about the completion of the large circle is dependent on the mastery of the small. Humble beginnings are crucial to take steps, because the last step is just as equally important as the first.
Right. Exactly.
And until we have that revelation, then nothing is wasted.
Right.
Nothing is wasted, because it's only when we get to the end of the journey of completing the circle we can look back at it to say, oh my goodness, without that I would have never seen this.
So in the moment we may think that there's a misstep, but it's all purposed.
All purposed. When we really can see at that vantage point of closing the circle and the loop, as you even see in this picture, the gap, when that is really knit as one, we see that we are standing in the moment of complete expression of large through the lenses of small. And this is the mastery of the large and the small, that nothing is forsaken, everything is counted. The cost is a summational measure of full expanse, full potentiality. The only limitation is our perspective.
Right.
And that goes back again to the vision of wiping the board clean. Please don't allow my perspective to diminish or limit your perspective. It simply is my perspective as it is yours.
Right, and so we share from the place of our ingathering to where we are today.
Right. And now, from that perspective, this is what allows us to, like, if we fully comprehend what we're sharing and what we're saying, then, and if we are extracting out from a narrative of a language that resonates to a frequency, and we can define it as life, because we can see life emerges, and this is what's being arisen from this, because we can't complete circle until we comprehend death and life are but a circle.
Right, it's the same thing.
It's the same thing. Again, it's based on
experience.
It's experience or the process of becoming in that experience.
You know, actually, I was thinking about the Tender Warrior?
Mm-hmm.
And that journey that Nick Nolte had him on.
Right.
About going up the hill, like the mountain journey, and he was giving him all this expectation about what he was going to find, and he showed him a rock.
Right. To distract him. It's that. Because he kept on pining, like, when is it? When
are we going to get there? When are you going to get there?
And finally, Nick Nolte was so just, I had enough. Okay, it's that.
It's that.
It's the rock. I'll point at something, anything. It's that. Huh? Right. You're missing the point. It's the journey.
Exactly. And so it was connecting me to, even like on the headstone on the grave, the dash in between, right?
Yep.
From the beginning to the end. And that dash in the middle is what connects the beginning to the end.
Yeah.
And that's literally what I was pondering last night before I went to bed.
It's a date to a date.
That's right.
There's
to close the circle.
To close the circle.
Yeah.
But I am feeling that even this morning I'm feeling shifts in the spirit right now. And they're gentle, yet they always speak the same way. They're never, if we can see correctly, they never agitate you out, because you're always, it's within you. It's just a realization that something is speaking right now, and I keep on seeing this, especially where I am right now. I'm feeling this this language of a groan and the wail, and it's not a bad thing, because it's dependent on perspective of where you are, and I just want to give this as what I'm feeling, that I'm feeling that the Father is very close. And in that language, this is why I'm setting this up this way, is that the Father is the only one that can close the gap. And that's solely based on the perspective. Whether your circle is a mile in circumference or it's only inches, it matters not. It matters on the perspective of how you see yourself. And this is vitally important, because of what I want to just share with this verse. I want to share about the matrix that we're in the perspective of how we can see out of it. Because there is a language in the Hebrew that directly speaks about the matrix of the womb, and yet we already know that there is a lesser matrix that is playing out, and this is what we're trying to shed light on, is
right,
like,
the inverted verse.
how do we get out of the lesser matrix that was really not really the intention, but it produced itself in a form of, it's an unsustainable matrix,
right,
that is bleeding and leaching from the sustainable matrix. And
right.
This is why, we're assisting the best we can from our perspective to say, hey, the wrestle is the night and the day. We wrestle are the depth of the dark. It's really it's the wrestling the light of our day. Our day is what allows us to see the depth of the dark, but because we're not seeing the full value of all, we're limited on what is truly deep. We're not really seeing deep, dark for what it is, because the lesser narrative, the matrix, has control and power of defining what is deep. Until we can break through, then we're not able to see, oh my goodness, the wrestle of the day is dependent on the wrestle of the night, because that's what completes the circle.
Well, and you're actually explaining duality.
It's seeing duality correctly to
Right.
realize both are purposed.
Right, and both exist at the same time.
Light and day, night and dark, outside of the parentheses of this envelope of time, they are but one. And yet we're limited by other people's projection to say dark is evil, light is good, this is what it is, evil, bad. We've separated it out, but trying to give a perspective of central standing that we can comprehend correctly, at least my vantage point, my perspective. So I wanted to go into what I sent you, and let's just look at the word for the matrix. So I put in here the mastery of the lesser matrix. To master the lesser matrix, one is required to enter into love and have compassion, as this is how we become a mother of the greater matrix. To complete the circle where small meets large, too little before too late. So I broke this definition down. This is simply a definition of matrix in, and I know that you put that video out. I already had this in a large file, but the file is so vast that it's almost a book right now. It's at 100 or almost 200 pages of progressional becoming through us comprehending of who we are. There's nothing external in this matrix that we need to. Our internal work is what we need to be concerned about, because it greatly affects the reality of this outward matrix.
Right. Well, we're manifesting it.
We're manifesting. That's my point. Is
as creators.
Right. So when we need to break free of a lesser, so we can move into the greater's narrative of the intentions of why there is a matrix, of the intention of it, so we can create, just like we're sharing with Jesse, like casting the vision, so the vision can be pondered, comprehended, and then cast out as a stone before us. We have something to walk on. This is what cast out vision is in prognostication. So I put this definition here based off of, just went into the dictionary, pulled up what is a matrix. And in it we see that we have, it says in its first one, an environment of material in which something develops, or something, or surrounding medium or structure.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And then we see down in there where we're talking about...
well, I think it's amazing that even what they used as an example, free choices become the matrix of human life.
Absolutely. That's why I left it in there.
It's like, wow.
Because better sheep.
Right, in the beginning choose.
But what are we choosing?
To build love.
Are we choosing the choices of what we've deemed to be called freedom by another man's definition of what freedom is? Therefore, going up to the whiteboard and having a calculus or a summational total presented to us and saying that is that.
Right.
And we sit there and go like, absolutely, wow, I can't even comprehend the fathom the depth of that. That must be it. But not realizing, erase the board and allow for unlimited potentiality to present itself if you so have the faith.
Well, that is a true definition of source.
Right. It's knowing that, and this again is the mature revelation, I believe, of being anxious for nothing, but allowing for anticipation to really be the mature resonance of reverence, right? It's having the awareness of what source is. Therefore, I vibrate to such a high frequency in the resonance of anticipation. I brought myself into alignment. I can push back time by vibrating at such a velocity that I've moved dimensionally into present, fully present, by pulling the past and pulling the present or the future into my moment called present.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's how I see it.
Oh,
I see
yeah.
my
Well,
mind's
that's
eye.
that. There's that quantum entanglement again. You know, the
If
quantum, which everything is running simultaneously.
if we have the ability to see correctly, we can vibrate in the knowing at such a high rate of velocity, we can pull in both extremities of past and future into the present and live in that. And this is how we blink in and out.
And on top of that, by the same token, right? Because you're bringing it in, you're then manifesting it out. So it goes to the past and to the future.
You're affecting.
It's both.
It's both. Well, yeah, absolutely. You're rewriting, you're healing, you're bringing restoration to the foundation of the beginning by already directing the end, and you stand as the middle marker.
Yep.
You are now the director of time, inside of time, but also outside of time. Like, it's just.
So then you become in the place of timelessness.
You're in the place of timeless because you pushed back, because you cannot pull the past to the present and the future to the present without expanding out, and the only way is in the vibrational form of expansion yourself. Right. So you've opened an envelope in time. These are the gatekeepers.
You're the portal.
You're the portal. So
you're the portal.
If you're a time machine, then really time is irrelevant because you've now functioned outside of that dimension.
Right.
And that's what I see is coming. And this is the quickening that's coming, or the full awareness is coming. Father is waiting for this to be manifested, and he's about to marry Mother in this holy union. And this is what I'm seeing right now. It's very undoing in the level of what it's presenting itself.
Right. So like you've shared before, Mother and Father have been divided.
Purposely divided in such generous love that they knew what they were doing for the purpose of unity's encounter. They are so much like it's an amazing love story when you realize we need to separate ourselves for the purpose of meeting again, and we will meet. And so they separate out, knowing they both have a journey that they need to go on, because it's us.
Right.
But the amazing love story is they're heartbroken because they don't want to separate, but they know that the greater love is revealed in the journey that brings unity to one again.
Right, and so in their separateness, they are gathering us so that we can all experience the oneness together.
Macro, micro. In the expanse of all Father, all Mother, because we are one and the same, we get to express ourselves in this microcosm of that exact experience, where it's just simply a fractaled expression of the love of our Mother and Father.
Yeah, agreed.
So let's look at this. So we have this synonyms of mold, dye, shape, casting, template, pattern, frame, right? It's all talking about to replicate for representation in the matrix. So now I want to just linger here for a second, because we're talking about a matrix of lesser and a matrix of greater. And this is why it's so important that I'm hearing, and I felt this as we've had to come out of the lesser matrix. It was dictating to us its form and representation. But until we were able to come out of it, this is where our true journey started, even though the steps inside the matrix were just as important, because we've already established that. The last step has to be, or the first step connects to that last step. So we know that they're all important. I'm saying this to put ease before people, to say it's all good.
Right.
It's all good. But I want to shed light on the potential of the greater matrix. And as soon as we come out in the realization of, whoa, there is something greater, and we can move into the potential of what the intention is for us to become.
Right.
So now we can see this language of, in the Hebrew, resh het mem, and in its own definition, it's talking about the womb and the matrix.
Yes, it is.
And so, and then it roots down to, we'll just bring up the one. It roots into to love and have compassion. That's the primitive root of the womb and the matrix. Mercy.
Right. I like this to find, have, and obtain.
Right. To show. To love. So this is huge, that we can define that to come out, like this is important, that first of all, if you find it, then why wouldn't you give the same measure of how you found it? So have compassion and give love, because that's what needs to be found. This is opening the portal of intention. This is opening the matrix. This is Mother's word, because this is directly connected. I know you've shared this and I've shared it, that the mem of Mother is the open mem, that is the womb that allows us to enter. And
right, so re-enter into Mother's matrix so that we can be born again.
And then, right, so that's the open gate in the mem, but it's also, if it's an entrance, it's also an exit. It's also the comprehension that it's a breath. It's an in and it's out.
Right, and I've always envisioned it as the sheepfold.
Right.
Because the shepherd would always lay in front of the sheepfold at night to protect, so
Right.
that they could come in and out of the sheepfold through his direction or her direction.
Right.
To lead them into the pastures where they would feed and gather what they need to. And then at night, go back into the sheepfold where they're protected by the shepherd.
Right. Absolutely.
Because the shepherd's job in the language, through the Lamed, is to instruct through those waters.
Right.
And be that door to open the revelation up to the sheep.
Absolutely. So we can see in this word, Resh Het Mem, that we have the headstone that is rightfully separated, knowing the sealed waters. Now that mem, there's two mems right there. So knowing Mother's waters from Father's waters, the above and below, or within, or with the out, or without.
Right, and if this is presenting itself, then that means that Mother has already been dealt with and gone through.
Right.
Because you can't get to that. You can't get to Father unless you go through Mother's teaching first, because his teaching is behind hers.
Right. This would be a language of becoming, because you would have to enter back into Mother's womb, into the Now this is why we can divide out the lesser matrix, because unless you've gone into Mother's womb,
right,
then you have not entered the correct matrix, and that should tell you that there's a different matrix, that we're being born into this world.
But that's being born into the flesh.
That's the flesh, but that's the lesser matrix that grabs hold of. Unless that's again the story of, unless we know what the true Mother and Father is and enter back into their ways, we'll never know how to build the Ark of Intention.
Exactly.
And so there's a language here being said, and there are many ways to find humility and many ways to enter Mother. It's not just by, again, my mathematical summation on the board. There are many that have found Mother organically and have become Mother organically.
Right. We're just showing it because we found it through the language.
Right. Our dimensional bridge. A circle is really an expression of a completed arc. I don't care how big.
Right. It's an upper arc and a lower arc that have connected to make a circle.
To make the circle. And so what we are doing, because this can get really deep really fast, because really there is an intention to come into this matrix, and there's an intention to leave this matrix. That's why Mother, and they say that Yeshua is the right hand path, because it's entering the right way, so we can then come back again to assist. Or how did we come in? Did we come in, again, this is rhetorical, did we come in through the left, therefore we establish the right? Because a circle goes in a direction, does it not? And it's already predetermined as a winding in or a winding out. So if we've come in from the left hand, from initiating from the left hand circle, then it would say the way out is the way right. Go up the right hand path as that completes the circle. Because everything about the English narrative and the Western culture is right to left, correct?
Right to left would be Hebrew, and
Or,
all
sorry,
the other
left to right.
cultures.
Right.
English is backwards.
Right.
English, as we're reading on words on the page, is from left to right.
Right.
Where Hebrew is then from right to left. And
my point.
Pretty much all the other languages follow that. We're just the different. I mean, not all of them, because obviously Spanish, but
Right.
a lot of the Eastern ones, it was all based on right to left.
Yeah, my point is, I said it backwards, sorry, I didn't mean to confuse anyone, but the right establishes the left.
Exactly.
In the original context of language, we've bastardized it and we've said that, no, the left dictates to the right, and that's not the way it is.
Again, but that's the finality of the alphabet, the alpha language, was established in the 1500s.
Right.
Right? So in the 1500s, the inverted verse was established by changing everything, turning it upside down and backwards, changing it from left, from going from right to left to right.
Right. So now we have a solidified thought process that connects to through a stamp of time to say there was a matrix that we've lost sight of, the intention. What came in and produced a doorway into a new matrix that all of a sudden we're going in, it's just it's a dead language. We go
right,
in,
because there's no frequency vibration to it.
Right.
And each letter doesn't have a meaning.
Right. And so this brings up another point is, if you've entered the matrix of life and it's associated to a vibrational frequency that is calibrated in letters, and therefore and now you really can see life over death, because it's still, life and death are components, and if life is life and death is death, then again it goes macro micro as well, correct? Like, life is life, no matter what it's associated to, it's still to the resonance frequency of life. If we're finding a life frequency language and there's a dead language, what gives way? Does death dictate to life, or does life dictate to death? What is the greater and what is the lesser? Rhetorical question. I know how I see it, that this is what gives us the power and the ability to still transact in a lesser language, English, because we're comprehending, or we're learning, or we're being learnt in life's language and frequency. We're not really held hostage to trying to decipher out anymore, even though we did in our first steps the English language, trying to divide it out, going like, this language, it says this and it's kind of hidden in here. But this language of light supersedes that of death, and it gives us the authority over death.
Right. Well, I guess you have to go into the description of the difference between life and death to even comprehend that.
Right.
Because when you look at the word life, chai, het yod, right, which is the symbol right here between in the matrix, right in the middle.
Rightfully dividing what is and what is not.
This is chai. This is het yod tav, which is the covenant of life. And in the covenant of life, the exact opposite of that, we were talking about tardime before, with the deep sleep. Mm-hmm. But sleep is a euphemism for death. Mm-hmm. So when people are in the deep sleep, the tardime that we've talked about, they are actually in death.
Right. And
until they are made alive, which is the covenant, chai, of life, and it ends with the tav.
So if you're
the covenant of one love. The only way to be made alive, truly, is to find love.
That's my point of what this is that absolutely, to love and have compassion.
Otherwise, you're the walking dead. Because you're in tardime. Sleep, the euphemism for death.
My point I'm trying to make with this as well is to break us free of the construct and the limitation of a lesser language that still holds us hostage, that people, they want to say, well, you've used this word or this word, but really it doesn't mean this. And going like, the higher narrative would say, if you found life, then it supersedes death in all realms. Because you're vibrating at the frequency of light that opens up the frequency of time. I pull the past to my present and the future to my present. I live in the now with the full potential of the intention of what this language was always meant for. So therefore, that frequency has no power over me, and I can use it as I see fit. I don't use it, I don't say that arrogantly. I just say that I can take a word, and regardless of its meaning, really, in its how they wordplay or wordsmith, it has no ability to spell cast upon me.
Right, and so even that verse when it says life and death are in the tongue, it's the language which is spoken. One is of life and one is of death.
Right. And I didn't want to really get into that, but that's exactly...
But it's a good segue.
But it's a good segue in.
In this word right here for womb and matrix, there's a dead language and there's a life language. And the inverted matrix that flipped everything upside down and backwards is based on the lesser death language.
Right.
The tongue of death.
Yep.
And we're talking about the right matrix language, the one that was hijacked.
Right.
But the true matrix of the process of our becoming is the life tongue.
Right.
Which is the Hebrew and the Aramaic.
Right.
Because this is what makes us new flesh. The Word made flesh manifest, being built in the mother's matrix through the correct life-giving language, tongue.
Right. Yeah, when we break this down, when you even comprehend the process of becoming the circle, because we have to divide it in half between night and day. And so,
right, because of duality.
Because of duality.
Yeah.
But there still is a horizon on this, so it really gives crosshairs to the circle, and we can see the quadrants of becoming.
Right.
Where, because there still is a representation of, in the macro-micro, of above and below. From that horizon line, there is a line that says there is above and below in the macro-micro. You're in the below, and you're going to have to journey. But it gives separation between life and death. Absolutely. And we see this transact in many ways, and that's exactly what it is the quadrants of becoming through the revelation to find the mother's love first before you can find the father's love. And these are all the quadrants of becoming a completed circle. And from that perspective, you're able to be called a wholehearted one. Exactly. So it's not really difficult to comprehend, but yet it still has to be processed and sectioned in measures of degrees and elements.
Right, like in the drips and drops and line upon line in order to grasp a hold of it.
And there needs to be much patience applied to this as we're becoming, but every day.
But it needs to be that way because that's how code is really written.
How can we express light if light is a summational total and yet we don't have comprehension of the fractals?
Right.
And so we're just expressing fractals of light. It's just the language of light, and that's what it's doing. So let's go to this Firstlings because the Firstlings is exactly what you were sharing about. You're mentioning about going into the stall or the sheep pen, the sheepfold.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have a language right here that. That's speaking of exactly that, but yet it doesn't have to necessarily mean the firstlings of a breed of animal. It's talking about the firstlings of who these firstlings are. It's relevant to human life.
Right, the first that are birthed through the mother's matrix.
Right.
And so this is the way of them saying the firstborn.
And so it says right there in its own definition as opening the matrix.
Exactly. So this is connecting to the first fruits.
The first fruits.
Or those who are the firstborn from the dead.
Right.
Connecting that to Yeshua.
And breaking free of what death is, because we can define what death is, and this is what we're trying to do, is say, what is death? Well, anything that doesn't align to the frequency of life.
Right.
If you haven't entered mother, then you're probably most likely in the matrix of death.
Right, and then we can connect that even to the Hebrew word emet, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's mother, with a tav on the end. Mother's covenant, or the mother that leads you to the covenant, is truth. And it's from Aman, and there's no noon. So it's mother's truth of the spiritual path leads you to the covenant that brings you life.
Right.
That's truth.
And that revelation is based upon, again, seeing as it or at it.
Right.
Based upon perspective, because if you're seeing as it, then you're realizing, like, oh my goodness, this is now your auric field, your energy, you're vibrating at a different velocity now, and you're actually able to see beginning and end, completing your own circle in this moment. And that's part of this. What this is doing is you are changing the vibrational tone
Right.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
By knowing what is and what is not.
Well, and it makes sense, too, that in the process of this and what you're sharing is that I've heard many people say that truth is relative. Well, truth is relative within the lesser narrative, the lower matrix, because it's always being changed and shifted, right?
Mm-hmm.
But once you enter into the spiritual concept, there is only one truth. We are one.
Mm-hmm.
And just like when they were in the matrix, they could reorganize. They could change things in a moment's notice. Like the scene with the cat.
Yeah.
Is it the same cat? Is this a glitch?
There still is.
Are they changing the truth and shifting it to make it relative?
Yeah. But we still need to know that there still is an individual factor to one consciousness. Like, we don't lose sight of the individuality. It's just it's consciousness connected in the over. Again, we can't really truly fathom that right now about what it is, because we're still in the parentheses of time. So there is still individual action that has to play out in this. There still has to be a willingness to partner with the frequency, even though there's those that may be more awake or that are opening up opportunity of potentials of expansion. There still has to be a willingness to partner with that revelation, to step into that measure. So there still is that in play as well here. So I want to go into the firstling and how it connects to, which I think is absolutely amazing, that it connects to the matrix as well, about separating out life and death, and it's the pay tet resh.
Mm-hmm.
So again, we have life and death is in the pay.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
The tongue that is spoken in this one is an elevated pay. So this isn't language of the fallen. This is the language of the risen, the spiritual language.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that the tet's in the middle of it. Like, if you were just to have pei resh by itself, we know that's fruit. And so tet has been put on the inside, meaning you're going to be wrestling with us in order to produce fruit.
Mm-hmm.
Because when this language comes to you, because it's new, you haven't experienced it, you're going to have to wrestle it. You're going to be poor and destitute in it because you're not going to know it. But it's going to raise you up to be a first fruit, as firstborn through the matrix.
And this is what I mean by the mastery of the small, because we don't count our don't think that we're so insignificant in the beginning, because mother is on this side of it, that if we were to say one is large and one is small, mother is really in the small. But that mastery of small is based on the elevation of the mouth, and so for you become a master of the small, that leads to the father, which is the large, but then they meet again to be the master of large and the master of small. If we were to, because this is where the Spirit has me right now, is comprehending the mastery of large and small is the same as mother and father. Mm-hmm. They're both progressional. So the elevation of the mouth is really required to comprehend the father, to have the mastery of the expanse of large. Mm-hmm. And so it's just another way to look at it. So I brought, if we go down, I brought some all the occurrences of this to see how it really, we're not going to go into any of these, I just simply wanted to see that all the occurrences, where it says womb, it's matrix, but I didn't change anything. This is how it presents itself in Scripture. So we can see that the word matrix is actually in Scripture. So we have womb, matrix.
I do find it interesting. In two of them already, we have Luya.
Right.
We have Luya, and again, people wouldn't see this,
Right.
Because they would think that it's just Yod He Vav He, but a Lamed has been added.
Right.
So again,
Teachers of light.
Teachers of light of Yod He Vav He connected to the matrix.
Right. Right.
Right.
Right. Yeah. So we know that. Yeah, they're in the matrix, and if they're in the matrix, then they're functioning in compassion and love, because that's the only way that they could have found their way out.
Exactly.
And not necessarily. First of all, you have to have compassion and love for yourself.
Yes.
Before you can express the correct frequency to another. If you're doing it in an inverted fashion,
it's not sustainable.
It's not sustainable, and you're going to cripple not just yourself, but you have the potential of crippling another individual, based on really, and I know everything's progressional, so I'm careful with that.
Because it's how we learn what is and what isn't sustainable.
Right. Because what is, again, love is the experience.
Exactly.
And compassion, if love is an experience, then you think compassion is an experience. Well, if there's a partial before the great is revealed, it's all part of incremental becoming.
Well, again, I guess that would fall under the two camps, love or fear. So compassion obviously comes straight out of the camp of love.
Yeah. But what I am feeling, especially this morning even, is like, whew, something was sharing, I was being shared
Gosh, this is so crazy. Just what I find crazy so these first three that we're looking at,
with.
Kaf Lamed is in front of it. This means to be whole.
Completed and whole.
Whole.
Yeah.
Healed.
Yeah.
Like a whole being, the
Yeah.
wholeness of,
Yeah.
the wholeness of the matrix of being whole.
But again, that's why this is.
That's so amazing.
That's why that even this is the completion of circle.
Right. So fill your half circle, fill your cup with instructions so
Right.
that you can be made whole.
Right. Yeah, and again, like I realize that this, even I comprehend the level of intensity of what's being shared, and I know it frustrates a lot of people because they can't really see what they need to see, or that it's not true. They're seeing what they need to see, but they're not seeing what they want to see. Is probably more accurately put. But be patient with yourself because it's exactly where you need to be right now. But this is from a very, very big file that I want to express that talks about a little bit deeper things about why and who we are, and hopefully we can get to a little bit here this morning. So we're completing the circle, but we need to comprehend.
Goodness, there's another Luya.
We need to comprehend the
Jeez.
generosity of Mother, and that there is a time that the teachers are now in place releasing what is necessary so we can connect and complete the circle.
Kaf Lamed, Kaf Lamed, Kaf Lamed, Kaf Lamed, over and over and over again.
All of them. There's 12 occurrences in there, and I just found it astounding that how they're all kind of.
Yeah, there's another Kaf Lamed and another Kaf Lamed and another Kaf Lamed. It's like 10 out of the 12 have Kaf Lameds.
Right.
So there's that 10-12 number again, right? 10 northern tribes, 2 southern tribes. It's always 10 and 2.
So go down to the bottom, keep on going down a little bit, and then so this is the root of what we just looked at. The first one's to open, that which separates or first opens,
Right.
to be set apart, to be set free,
Wow.
to burst through.
Right.
That's the primitive root of these first fruits.
The ones that come through the matrix.
The ones that come through. This is why it's so important that
the firstlings.
Who was the individual that you loaded on our website that had
Jason Shirka.
Okay, I didn't listen to it, and I will listen to it. But I had this off to the side, and I thought, well, if that's coming through, it's important that we know that first of all, that we can just share with people that it is a biblical principle. If you're tethered to the book of potentiality, or the book of mirrors, what I like to call it now, is that there is still an opening that's saying, come this way. What is this way? What are the ways of life that create the intention while we're all in our proverbial desert?
Right.
And this is what it is, to be set free. Mother's language, mother's frequency, looking as it, but you have to be looking at it first to comprehend what it is. Then when you recognize what it is, now you see as it.
Right.
Okay.
And if you can see it, you can become it.
If you can see it, you can become it. So I thought that was just pretty spectacular in its own right without even going really...
Well, in the language, I'm just even thinking about in the book of John when it talks about Yeshua slipping away. Like every time they would go to capture him, right?
Right.
They would come to grab a hold of him, and it says he would slip away or slip out.
Mm-hmm.
We can connect it to here. And it's what you were talking about before within being able to move in and out of the dimensions.
Yeah, it's the flight of a straight arrow is actually circular by it's like what the Spirit showed me. I get it. It sounds round and round, no pun intended, but it's straight as the way, because when the archer looses the arrow straight as the way, it actually comes right around, and if it's shot accurately, it pierces your back. That's the measure of the archer, is what I've been shown right now, that when we release the arrow correctly, straight as the way of Yeshua, that it actually supernaturally, yes, it's straight and it hits the mark in front of us, but really that mark in front of us is really metaphoric for you've just struck yourself in the back.
So turn around and meet yourself.
Yeah, well, yeah, you've become face to face if it's done correctly, because you've closed the gap of completion of mother's circle and father's circle, and that's the way of the arrow.
Sure.
Because it's not lineal, it's circle.
Right. Well, then that pulls in the divine feminine.
It has to be that way because mother and father are both unique in their own characteristics of individuality. So that's what I'm seeing right now, and I'm not trying to be tangled or confusing, and a circle is straight and straight is circle, but yet it is. That's really what the language is saying.
Well, but again, that makes sense because masculine is linear, feminine is circular, and so they both have to be existing at the same time for creation to be.
That's right, and that's really the comprehension of winding up the spiral staircase. If you wound the straight with the circle, and that is called the spiral.
Right.
And so it's the same language saying that this is how we become one again.
Right.